You are now listening to the Vegan Stuff podcast with Caavakushi.
Hosting this podcast today are our two AI hosts, Sam and Kim. If you simply can't get enough of us, go to caavakushi.com and sign up for our vegan newsletter and get our free 7-day high-protein vegan meal plan. And we also have some good news. We will be releasing our first ever cookbook pretty soon, so stay tuned. Hey, don't forget to follow us on our socials too.
All right, so, we're going to dive into something that I know you've been really curious about, and that's veganic farming.
Okay.
It's something that a lot of people are talking about these days, and it's kind of going beyond just what you eat.
Right.
It's about like how that food is actually grown.
Yeah.
And you sent me a bunch of articles and interviews, and most of them were focused on this UK farmer named Laurence Candy.
Oh, yeah.
Who was actually doing this.
Really cool.
And I gotta say, this is fascinating stuff.
It's definitely pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible in agriculture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got pieces from Vegan Food and Living.
Okay.
Dorset Echo, Plant-Based News, BBC News, even transcripts from some of Candy's YouTube interviews.
Wow.
We've got like Northeast Animal Rights.
Okay.
And Animal Rebellion Volunteers channels.
Interesting.
So our mission today is to really cut through the hype and get into the practicalities of how this veganic farm actually works.
Yeah, because I think his story is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It really highlights how individual choices can really ripple out and maybe change the entire system.
Right, and it's not just a change in diet, it's like a whole philosophy.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
But let's start with Candy's journey.
Oh, okay.
The articles mention that he lost most of his dairy herd to bovine tuberculosis back in 2017.
Oh, wow.
And it seems like that was a real turning point for him.
Yeah, I think it forced him to really confront the realities of livestock farming.
Right.
In a way he hadn't before.
Mm-hmm.
And, on top of that, within a few years, he was dealing with his father's illness, the death of his brother-in-law, and then the passing of his mother.
Oh, my gosh.
So these personal tragedies, on top of losing his herd, it really solidified his commitment to finding a different path.
Yeah, you can just sense that struggle in the interviews.
Yeah.
Like the feeling that he needed to create a system that was more aligned with his values.
Right.
But how do you even go about farming without relying on animal products at all?
Right.
Like, what does this veganic approach actually involve?
Well, it's more formally known as biocyclic vegan agriculture.
Okay.
And it's about cultivating a completely closed loop system.
Right.
So no manure, no bone meal, nothing derived from animals is used.
Okay.
And that includes a lot of fertilizers that are common even in organic farming.
Oh, wow.
And instead, the focus is on building soil health through practices like green manures and really long-term composting.
There's this one detail in one of the interviews that just blew my mind. He was talking about this biocyclic humus compost that's matured for at least 4 years.
Wow.
And apparently a Greek farmer that he knows has been using this method and getting incredible results.
Really?
Like huge, healthy vegetables without any pesticides.
That's the key, by nurturing the soil's natural ecosystem.
Right.
You're essentially boosting plant health and resilience to the point where you don't need pesticides.
Right.
It's a preventative approach, not a reactive one,
right,
which is a core principle of sustainable farming.
Yeah, it's like you're creating this incredibly rich foundation that nourishes the plants from the ground up.
Right.
I'm curious, though, does this approach have any, historical roots?
It does.
Or is it a completely modern concept?
It actually goes back to the 1950s with the work of this German organic pioneer named Adolf Hoops.
Okay.
And then his ideas were further developed by his son and Dr. Johannes Eisenbach, who actually created the biocyclic vegan standard.
So there's an actual standard for this.
There is.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So what does that entail, and how is it different from, say, regular organic certification?
So the biocyclic vegan standard lays out really strict criteria for every aspect of the farming process.
Okay.
And it ensures that no animal inputs are used at any stage.
Wow.
And it's not just some niche idea either.
Right.
It was officially accredited by IFOM,
Yep.
the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements in 2017.
So it's got the, the gold standard stamp of approval.
Exactly.
Which definitely adds legitimacy to this whole approach.
Yeah.
But let's be real, can you actually make a living doing this?
Right.
I mean, can veganic farming go beyond, small-scale operations and become a viable way to feed the world?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And Candy himself addresses this in a lot of the sources you shared.
Yeah.
And he's very transparent about the challenges.
Yeah.
He had to completely reevaluate his entire farm operation.
Right.
Starting with, whether his land was even suitable for arable crops.
He was lucky in that regard. His land is well suited for crops.
He was.
But that's not the case for every farmer, right?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of factors to consider, like soil type, rainfall, topography, access to water.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the economic side of things.
Yeah. He had to think about the cost of new equipment, learning new skills.
Yeah.
And, finding new markets for his produce. He was no longer selling milk or meat, so that entire income stream was gone.
Right. And he even mentions in one of the sources that he's selling some of his crops as animal feed in the short term.
Oh, wow.
Simply because there just isn't enough demand yet for specifically veganic produce.
Right.
Not exactly ideal, but it highlights the market realities that he's facing.
Yeah, it seems like consumer demand is a major factor here.
Absolutely.
If more people actively seek out veganic produce, it could incentivize more farmers to make the switch.
Yeah.
But what about the role of companies?
Yeah.
What about the big players in the plant-based food industry?
Yeah.
Do they have a part to play in this?
Absolutely. Candy's actually quite vocal about this in the interviews.
Okay.
He argues that plant-based companies need to put their money where their mouth is.
Right.
And start sourcing ingredients from veganic farms.
Okay.
Even if it means paying a premium.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If these companies are truly committed to a more sustainable and ethical food system, they need to support the farmers who are making it happen on the ground.
Yeah.
But it can't just be about individual companies or consumers, right?
Right. No.
What about the role of government policy?
That's a really complex issue.
Yeah.
Candy points out that there's currently no specific policy in the UK to incentivize veganic farming.
Right.
He's also hesitant about the idea of the government dictating dietary choices.
Right.
There are concerns about repeating the mistakes made in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
where strict regulations on livestock farming backfired and caused a lot of backlash from farmers.
So it's a balancing act. How do you encourage this shift towards more sustainable practices without being too heavy-handed?
Right, that's where things get tricky.
Yeah.
Candy suggests using subsidies to promote organic and veganic farming.
Okay.
And structuring trade deals in a way that protects smaller-scale, sustainable farms.
It seems like these policy decisions have the potential to either help or hinder the growth of veganic farming.
Absolutely.
But beyond policy, what are some of the other challenges that someone like Candy faces when trying to transition their farm?
Sure.
It's not like you can just flip a switch overnight, right?
It's definitely a process.
Right.
Candy talks about needing to learn new skills.
Yeah.
Adapt existing infrastructure,
right.
And even deal with the emotional aspect of transitioning away from livestock.
He mentions in one of the articles, feeling guilty about having to sell his cows.
He does.
Even though they went to a sanctuary.
Yeah.
And that human element is something we often forget about when we talk about farming.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the technical side of things. It's about people's livelihoods.
Right.
And their connection to the land.
Their whole lives.
Yeah. And he also emphasizes the importance of community and knowledge sharing.
He does.
He credits organizations like the Vegan Organic Network and farmers for stark-free farming for providing guidance and support throughout his transition.
Really important.
So it's not just about one farmer doing his own thing.
Right.
It's about a network of people working together to make this vision a reality.
It is.
But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Caavakushi.
Did you know we have a vegan search engine, a vegan forum, a vegan newsletter, and so much more coming soon? So why not check us out at Caavakushi.com.
Welcome back to Vegan Stuff with Caavakushi.
Covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there are still so many fascinating details and nuances to explore.
Absolutely.
So let's take a closer look at those fascinating details you mentioned. So, okay, remember that biocyclic humus compost we were talking about?
Yeah.
It's not just about adding nutrients to the soil.
Right.
Candy claims it's a total game changer in terms of disease resistance.
And that's huge.
Yeah.
That directly challenges the assumption that you need animal-based fertilizers to effectively manage pests and diseases.
It seems so counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But by creating this like incredibly healthy soil environment, you're boosting the plant's natural defenses.
It's fascinating, It's like a really great example of how a holistic approach can lead to really sustainable solutions.
Yeah, it's not just about treating the symptoms, it's about addressing the root cause.
Precisely. And speaking of root causes,
Yeah.
Let's talk about those market challenges that Candy's facing.
Yeah.
He's very upfront about the fact that there's a limited market for veganic produce right now.
Right, and he's taking some pretty innovative steps to address that.
Yeah.
In one of the interviews, he mentions that he's working on a survey to gauge consumer demand for vegan-certified products.
Smart.
So if he can actually prove that there's a market for it, he'll be in a stronger position to, secure funding and expand his operation.
That's a smart move. Data is really crucial when it comes to convincing investors and retailers to get on board with something new. Like veganic farming.
Yeah, it's about demonstrating that this isn't just a niche market. It's like a growing trend with real potential.
Absolutely. And it ties back to what we were discussing earlier about the role of consumers. If people want to see more veganic farms, they need to actively seek out and purchase these products.
It's classic supply and demand.
It is.
But, Candy doesn't just place the responsibility on consumers. He also calls out the plant-based industry for what he sees as, a lack of support.
Yeah, he makes a valid point.
Yeah.
There's a certain irony, in companies criticizing animal agriculture. While still operating within a commodity system that often prioritizes profits over ethics and sustainability.
It's like they're saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly.
Candy's urging these companies to pay a fair price for veganic ingredients. Even if it means, a slightly higher cost for their product.
Yeah. He's challenging them to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And, I think this raises a bigger question.
What's that?
About the need to move beyond the commodity system altogether.
What do you mean by that?
Well, as long as farmers are primarily producing crops that are valued as animal feed, they're kind of stuck in a system that ultimately perpetuates the demand for animal products.
It's like this vicious cycle that's hard to break free from.
Exactly. And that's why initiatives like Candy's are so important.
Yeah.
He's creating a model that demonstrates the viability of a truly plant-based agricultural system.
It's about creating a paradigm shift in the way we think about food production.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back to something you touched on earlier about the practical challenges of transitioning to veganic farming. It's not just about having the right land. It's about acquiring new skills and adapting existing infrastructure.
Candy talks about the learning curve he faced.
He does.
Having to master new techniques like green manuring and cover cropping.
Yeah.
And these are methods that, aren't commonly used in conventional agriculture.
They require a really deep understanding of soil biology and plant interactions.
Yeah. It's a whole different way of thinking about farming.
It is, and it highlights the importance of mentorship and knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
Candy credits organizations like the Vegan Organic Network and farmers for stock-free farming. For providing him with invaluable support during his transition.
So it's about building a community of practice.
It is.
Where farmers can learn from each other and share best practices.
Exactly.
Did you know we have a vegan search engine, a vegan forum, a vegan newsletter, and so much more coming soon? So why not check us out at Caavakushi.com.
One thing that struck me was Candy's emphasis on the importance of education.
Oh, yeah.
He believes that if more people understood the basics of soil biology, they would see, the inherent flaws in industrial agriculture and the value of veganic methods.
He even goes so far as to say that if everyone understood soil biology, we wouldn't have an environmental crisis.
That's a bold statement.
It is, but it speaks to the profound importance of healthy soil. Yeah. It's the foundation of our entire food system, and yet it's often overlooked and degraded in conventional agriculture.
Candy's story really highlights the interconnectedness of all these issues. The environment, animal welfare, human health, and the economy.
It's a complex web.
It is.
And veganic farming offers a potential solution that addresses all of those concerns.
So we've talked about the challenges, but what about the opportunities? What are some of the potential benefits of, scaling up veganic farming?
Well, there are many.
Okay.
First and foremost, It's a more environmentally sustainable way to produce food.
Okay.
By eliminating animal inputs and focusing on soil health.
Right.
We can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, protect water resources, and promote biodiversity.
And it also aligns with the growing demand for plant-based food.
It does.
As more people choose to eat less meat and dairy,
right.
Veganic farming provides a way to meet that demand without relying on animal agriculture.
And it has the potential to create a more resilient and localized food system by empowering farmers to grow a wider variety of crops.
Okay.
We can reduce our dependence on global supply chains and create more food security.
So it's not just about what we eat. It's about how we produce food and how that impacts the planet and our communities.
Exactly. Now let's talk about what we can do to support this transition to a more veganic food system.
Okay.
Candy suggests several actions, starting with consciously seeking out and purchasing veganic products.
Okay, so that sends a clear signal to retailers and producers that there's a market for these goods.
Exactly. We can also support organizations that are working to promote veganic agriculture.
Okay.
And help farmers make the transition.
Like the Vegan Organic Network?
Yes.
And Farmers for Stock-Free Farming.
Exactly. And we can advocate for policies that incentivize sustainable and ethical farming practices.
Okay.
Right.
That could involve supporting subsidies for organic and veganic farming, opposing trade deals that undermine small-scale farmers.
Right.
And promoting research into veganic methods.
And of course, education is key.
Yes.
The more people understand about soil health.
Right.
And the interconnectedness of our food system.
Right.
The more likely they are to support a shift towards veganic farming.
It's about changing the narrative.
It is.
And highlighting the benefits of this approach.
And ultimately, it's about creating a more just and sustainable food system for all.
Speaking of creating a more just and sustainable system, I came across something in the research that I found particularly inspiring.
Okay.
Candy's exploring the possibility of setting up a micro oat milk facility on his farm.
Wow, that's impressive.
I know, right?
Really cool.
He wants to cut out the middleman and create a truly sustainable and ethical product, controlling the entire process from seed to shelf.
Wow.
And he's not doing it alone.
Right.
He's working with organizations like Stock-Free Farming to assess market demand and secure funding for the project.
It's a fantastic example of vertical integration and collaboration.
Yeah.
You know, by taking control of the entire supply chain.
Right.
He can ensure fair prices for his crops and create a product that aligns with his values.
Right. It's about creating a closed loop where nothing is wasted and the farmer receives a fair share of the profits.
It's a model that could be replicated by other veganic farmers.
Yeah.
Creating a network of small-scale sustainable food businesses.
That's a vision worth striving for.
Absolutely. It's about reimagining our food system and creating a future where farming is both ethical and ecological.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Laurence, Candy, and veganic farming, let's recap the key takeaways. What have we learned from this journey? I mean, for starters, we've seen that veganic farming isn't just some, idealistic theory.
Right.
It's a practical and, dare I say, inspiring reality.
Yeah.
Thanks to folks like Laurence Candy.
What really struck me was the level of thought and intention behind every aspect of his operation.
Right.
It's not just about avoiding animal products. It's about creating a truly regenerative system that works with nature.
Yeah.
Not against it.
And it challenges a lot of assumptions we might have about farming.
It does.
We saw how focusing on soil health can actually make crops more resistant to pests and diseases, which reduces the need for chemical interventions.
It really flips the script on conventional agriculture.
Yeah.
Proving that you can have high yields and healthy plants without relying on those synthetic fertilizers or pesticides.
Right, but let's not sugarcoat things.
Right.
Candy's story also highlights the very real challenges facing this movement.
Yeah.
Market access, consumer demand, and policy support
all
play crucial roles in making veganic farming a viable option for more farmers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that systemic change is needed.
Right.
Not just individual action.
Right.
So while choosing veganic products when available is a great step, we also need to advocate for policies that incentivize these sustainable farming practices.
Yeah.
And support small-scale farmers.
And perhaps most importantly, we need to shift the narrative around food production.
Yes.
Candy's passion for educating others about soil health really resonated with me.
Yeah.
The more we understand about this interconnectedness of our food system, the more likely we are to make informed choices that support a more sustainable future.
He's a true advocate for change.
He is.
Not just in practice, but also in mindset.
Right.
His vision of integrating an oat milk facility on his farm really exemplifies that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, talk about closing the loop.
It is.
It's an inspiring example of how farmers can add value to their crops.
Right.
And create a truly sustainable and ethical product.
And it reinforces the potential for collaboration.
Yeah.
Between farmers, activists, and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Who are all working towards the same goal.
Right.
A more just and resilient food system.
So where does this leave us?
Right.
What can we take away from this deep dive into the world of veganic farming?
I think the biggest takeaway is that change is possible.
Yeah.
It might not be easy, and it certainly won't happen overnight.
Right.
But individuals like Laurence Candy are proving that a different path is possible.
It's about reimagining our relationship with food, with the land, with each other. It's about recognizing the power of our choices and using them to create a future where farming nourishes both people and the planet.
And ultimately, it's about fostering a sense of hope and possibility.
Yeah.
You know, Candy's story shows us that even in the face of immense challenges,
right,
we can create a more sustainable and compassionate world, one farm, one meal, one choice at a time.
So as you go about your day, think about the food on your plate and consider the journey it took to get there.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what role do I want to play in shaping the future of food?
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep making choices that align with your values.
Yeah.
The future of our food system depends on it.
Well, that's it for this deep dive.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of veganic farming.
Yeah.
And remember, every choice we make has the power to create a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
Did you know we have a vegan search engine, a vegan forum, a vegan newsletter, and so much more coming soon? So why not check us out at Caavakushi.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you liked this episode. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. Also, we would be so appreciative if you could just share this episode or this podcast with all your friends and family who are vegans or vegan friendly. We're also really excited because we are going to be launching something really cool pretty soon on the site, so keep an eye out for that. And we will see you really soon with a new episode.